Welcome everyone to another one of our 4:30 Poets Day Friday webinars. Today's webinar is, as we call it, spooky webinar. It's about all of the experiences I've had in my consultancy work over the last 20 years, or some of the experiences in my consultancy work over the last 20 years as an intuitive building biologist, where there have been entities in houses or ghosts in houses. And that is because there's either been a death underneath the roofline of the house or on the property. And generally it's not, within the last 5 or 10 years, it's history. It could be 150 years ago, it could be 100 years ago, and it could be a lot of the activity is actually Aboriginal entity or Aboriginal deaths and the entities left from them. What actually happens in the process of dying is that there is an emotional pain body charge, and from that charge, after death, you get what we call a death imprint in a property. And a death imprint is a bioplasmic radiation field. And let's say that happened out the bush 100 years ago, and 100 years later they come along, they put in a housing estate, and they divide everything up, and they put your land over the area where the person actually died, which is the death imprint. And what will happen is that if the death was a very violent death, and the entity type of activity in a house generally happens when there's been quite a violent death, because the more violent, the stronger the emotional pain body charge, the heavier, the stronger the energy. And those people who are sensitive to energy out there who are watching this may have been in or lived in different houses where they could probably tell a story or two of the things that go on generally at night time. So you get a bioplasmic charge which fills to the boundaries of the property, which is really interesting. That charge in a house, or radiation it is as bad as 5G when we have 5G streetlights. Just quickly, while I'm talking 5G, next webinar will be on the 2 types of 5G. Last night we released a blog about it. In 2 weeks' time we'll talk about it. It's something that really needs to be clarified for a lot of people, especially those people who are in fear of 5G. Okay, getting back to our spooky webinar. So yeah, some people come to me and say, I've got a ghost in a house, especially when we're doing expos. I'm reading lots of properties, and the first thing I'm reading or looking for when I'm doing a Google Earth reading is, has there someone died in the house? Is there bioplasmic radiation? And some people say, oh, I've got a ghost in the house, it's friendly. And not friendly though, it's actually not spirit. It's just an energy, which is an information energy field, which is that of what some people believe is the negative subconscious mind of the person that died. And that is why in some houses, some of the activity can be quite, would the word be there, scary for some people, or aggressive activity. But there are ramifications. What can happen if you've got an entity in a house from a death is you can experience sleep paralysis attacks. Now, I think it really depends on the person and their makeup, whether you actually experience them or not. I personally experience them. I'll tell you a little bit later some of my hairy experiences. They can cause death. And I did have a situation in a house I lived in when I was in my very early 20s, and my first born daughter, Michaela, was only weeks old in her crib in that house, and there had been a death on that property, and her nursery was the room directly over the top of the death imprint. And we had a situation where Amanda, who was my wife at the time, was in the kitchen, which was right next to the bedroom, and she heard Michaela choking. And luckily, Amanda acted quickly. Michaela was choking and was not a very good situation. And the energy in the room at the time, Amanda said, was absolutely shocking. She didn't know what was going on. Now, later on, I used that room as Michaela grew up and moved rooms. into an office, and I couldn't stand being there. The air was like so heavy and stifling. That was a long time ago, well before I had any knowledge of what we were doing now. It was interesting, that house too, because the night we moved in, Amanda said she saw a peeping Tom looking through the bedroom window. It wasn't a peeping Tom. That was our entity showing up first night we moved in. A couple of months later, we had a situation where I would experience a sleep paralysis attack. That's where you're lying there, you're having a bad dream, and all of a sudden your dream is becoming terrifying, and you wake up and you can't breathe and you feel as if something's squashing you on the chest. And within seconds you come to and you go, what the hell was that? While that was happening, Amanda would be fully awake and would see a man standing in the doorway, which is a hallway where entities are often seen because of the shape of the hallway, which I'll explain later. He was dressed in a pair of khaki army pants and a bare top with all these colours around him. That was a manifestation of the person who died on the property where that house was. And she saw him probably 4 or 5 times. We also had a situation in that house where we had a wood heater and we had a ceiling fan. We all know those fans, like the ceiling fans, to turn them on, they click, click, click. And during the night, I'd get up, so 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning to go to the toilet, as you do, and hear the fan on and the wood heater fan on. And I know damn well that I used to turn both those fans off before we went to bed. That's the type of activity that you can get when you haven't entered in the house. Some interesting anomalies tend to happen, which are experienced, which I haven't seen. However, a lot of my clients have relayed this information back to me, that often they see little children, especially little girls, playing with toys in the room, especially if it's a child's bedroom, or wandering around the house at night time. That actually isn't the entity. That's some sort of phenomenon that I can't explain, and I've asked other people who are much more knowledgeable than me about it. However, they can't explain it either, but it shows up time and time again. Another one is seeing an older woman dressed in, say, 18th century period dress in all white, leaning over people. That's another very, very, very common occurrence when there has been a death on the property when they haven't entered in the house. Okay, let's go into some of the experiences in my consultancy work I've had over the years. I'll show you a couple of photos. I don't have a huge amount of photos because these things are very hard to come by and we need permissions. First one, and I'll put it up now and share the screen, is a photo of this just looks like a piece of paper with arrows drawn on it. This was at a consultancy in the northern suburbs of Melbourne, probably back around 2011, 2012. And this particular house had, and I can detect this with a biotensor, and with experienced people can detect these things. It had 2 or 3 death imprints, and there had been a lot of activity in this house. And the funny thing was that the couple that owned this house were right into it. They loved this activity going on. They were so into it that they went to America and visited Amityville, where the Amityville horror occurred. You know, apparently there's a house in a museum or something going on there. And that's what rocked their boat. They loved that type of thing, where they got really excited about it. And they had their own activity in their house here in Melbourne. They would get footsteps at night time. They'd hear furniture being moved. They would hear utensils in the kitchen being moved around. And so what they decided to do one night was set up a vigil. And a vigil is where you set up something for the ghost to actually interact with us. Not all vigils go to plan or anything happens, but this night they decided to put a notepad and paper out on a side table and went to bed and waited to see what would happen. The next morning they woke up and that notepad had these arrows drawn on it, just like a child would draw arrows. The arrows actually pointed into the room next door, where there was one of the death imprints, and there'd been a lot of activity in that room also. The couple whose house I was visiting were gracious enough to allow me to have this photo and use it at a later date, which we're using today. So this photo has sat on my iPhone for years. It took me a while to find it this morning. I'm glad I did. And that's a classic example of a entity. These people are a little bit disappointed in the end, because in the end we plugged in a GeoCleanse, and that's programmed to remove the bioplasmic radiation and the death imprint in the house, because they like this activity, but in the end they understood that it wasn't a great thing to happen anyway. But the reason why we have that in that process available in the GeoCleanse is, as a building biologist, you would think my work would be going to people's houses and looking at smart meters and Wi-Fi and things like that. Never. It's always when there's some sort of activity in a house and someone's being upset or getting upset, or their emotions are changing for the worse. And it's usually the mother in the house that goes, what's going on here? I think I'll ring someone, and they eventually get my name from referrals from other people. And they have got no idea what's going on. And when I get there, we can actually find the imprint where the death is. Look at the radiation charge in the house, look at the activated grid lines which occur from it, and all those other things, and remove the energy completely. I actually remember being at one house, and the woman, this was a house in Mount Martha in Victoria, and the woman wasn't really on board with what I was saying. She was a bit too out there for it. Sometimes I can be like that. And we spotted what I thought was the death imprint in one room. But what it actually was the entity, which is the energy, and it actually moved around the room, which was a little bit scary. I hadn't really noticed that before, and followed us around the house. And at one stage, the energy ended up attaching to her energy field, her biofield, and it usually happens above the head. And if you know how to read energy, when someone has an attachment, their whole energy field is really dirty and it's really strong. Most people don't react to it, but the sensitive ones do. And some people, especially children, when that happens, it can really have a huge effect on their hormones and their neurotransmitters, and can have a massive effect on their behaviour for the worse. I've got a testimonial here, which I won't read the whole thing out, but it was from another consultant at Mount Martha, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and the daughter was acting up because of the entity in the house. And there's this one line in this testimonial that says, my daughter's behaviour, particularly my eldest, quite literally went back to normal straight away, and the negative and nasty outbursts have disappeared. That's because we got rid of the issue of the GeoCleanse. Okay, I'll remove that. Another interesting story on a consultancy job. This was out in Altona in Melbourne, probably 6 or 7 years ago, in an old part of Melbourne too. And this couple woke up one night, in the middle of the night, usually I think she said around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And a lot of the ghost activity or entity activity does tend to happen between 1 and 4 in the morning. I have a good friend of mine, Anthony Kilner from Supernal magazine, who's a great medium. I always remember him saying that the etheric tide, as he calls it, changes between 1 and 4 in the morning. That's when there's a lot more activity going on. That's where a lot of people actually wake up between, say, 1 and 3 in the morning, and can't get back to sleep. Anyway, this couple woke up in the middle of the night to hear a scratching noise in the spare bedroom, which was a junk room, so to speak. They just threw everything in there. They were trying to renovate the house. And when they got up there the next morning, in that bedroom, on the floor, etched into the floorboards, was a series of scratches, as if someone was trying to scratch their way out of it. But it wasn't like a claw mark, like from a a marsupial or something like that. It was like someone had got a nail and scratched all these marks in the floor. And they were quite surprised because they knew that floor extremely well. They had basically audited that floor beforehand because part of the renovation was resurfacing all the floors, and those marks only turned up overnight after that scratching noise occurred. Another interesting experience I had was a consult in Cranbourne probably 10 or 12 years ago. And this was back in the days when the very first mobile phones came out. They're quite small, but they had the first screens where you could take video. And this area of Cranbourne historically did have, there was a lot of knowledge historically about Aboriginal things going on and a lot of deaths. And one of the occupants of the house, the father, told the story how he was up on a ladder outside one day, and the ladder was quite stable, but some force just pushed the ladder sideways. And he was a tradesman, he was used to going up and down ladders, and he had a fall, but he knew how to fall properly from the ladder, thank God, and didn't hurt himself. But it scared the absolute living hell out of him. Later that morning during the consult, his 16-year-old daughter showed me with the phone, which was one of these very old phones, the video image of a couch, and behind the couch was this luminous white figure. And it's not an entity, because entities usually show up black and dusty, or like as I said before, looking like a human but not all there. This is white and luminous, and this figure bent down sideways and then stood up straight. I don't know, probably to maybe show the girl that there was something else there. According to other people who I've explained this to, they say it's an ethereal being. You have to be quite open and not a skeptic about these types of things, because they do exist. I can't explain it, but it was a fascinating photo, a little tiny bit of video to see. And it sort of brought up a little bit of deja vu in me. It was like, well, I've seen that before, but I don't know where, maybe in between lives, I don't know. But it was really, really very, very interesting. Another interesting consult was in Morningston about 10 years ago again. It was a house where there was a lot of spirit activity in the house, and there was one girl in the house, and she was about 18, 19 years old. And the girl was being, what she said, harassed by this entity. It was always in her energy field, and she could feel it, and it made her very uncomfortable, and she would panic and basically run out of the house or run away from the house. But what really spooked her was that there was a photo of her on the wall, and every day that photo would virtually get knocked off the wall or not from straight to sideways. And they didn't have earthquakes, or no one was slamming doors or anything like that. But this photo of this one girl who was getting attachment always kept on falling off the wall, which was the entity issue, which was doing that because it has a force. Another a photo we saw a couple of years ago at an expo in Launceston. Launceston is the oldest city in Australia, and the central CBD area is very, very old, and virtually every building has bioplasmic radiation from people dying. 100 years ago, 150 years ago, we didn't have micro ambulances or a high speed compared to what we would have had back then, ambulance service or paramedics or anything like that. People died at home, and there was a lot more probably lawlessness back then, and things happened. So while we're at Launceston at this expo, there was another exhibitor there who showed us a photo taken of a window or the side of a house where there was a window, and this house did have an entity. There was a death on the property, and in the window looking outwards was a face. It was a person. It was actually a manifestation of the entity. There was only two people who lived in the house at the time, and there were only two people present at that time of the house. There was no one else there, but there was a face. And she showed us this photo, and we were blown away. We unfortunately didn't get a chance to get a copy of it. I know she would have been grateful for us to have a copy and talk about it, because she was so excited about it, especially when I did the reading on the house and said, oh, someone died. She said, oh, we know about that. It was really, really, really interesting. Another experience I've had where in a house in Dalesford, I've done a bit of consulting up there over the years, and it's got a lot of entities, energies going on in the houses up there. I remember doing a consult up there one night or one afternoon and decided to stay the night. I was put up in a house on my own, and that night I couldn't sleep or wink. Something was keeping me up awake. I'm lying in bed doing the how do we count sheep, and the bed dropped about that far. It was like someone sat down on the bed. The bed went down and came back up. And I'm just sat up straight like, what the hell is that? And I'm on my own in a strange house in a country town in Victoria. I didn't know whether to leave or just sleep like the proverbial dog with one eye open all night long. I managed to stay the night, but I got away from there about 6 o'clock in the morning. I just, as soon as it was light, I've had enough of this. It was quite funny. Okay, back to sharing screens, and I'll show you another 2 photos, which are on a blog, which are on the website, and these are great photos. These come from a bloke in Sydney who we met at Mind Body Spirit in Sydney probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And I've told this story on a previous webinar where he hung around the stand, he was listening to what I was saying to people for readings. And he finally sat down and had a reading. And as soon as I looked at his property, I said, oh, someone's died there. And there was activity in the house. He said nothing. He bought a geo-cleanse, went away, came back on the Sunday 3 days later, hung around, waiting to see me. He finally got to see me, he sat down, and he was so excited. I said, what's up? You're back again. Problem? What can I help you with? And he said, I didn't tell you this, but I teach Buddhist meditation. He was Malaysian. And he said, I've got something going on in my house, which he called a ghost, and it was interfering with his meditation classes. It was stopping people from reading that correct state of meditation. And he thought, okay, I'll come to the expo, try and find someone who can help me. Saw me talking about ghosts, saw I picked the ghost in the house, so he thought take a chance and buy a geo-cleanse and see what happens. He took it home, plugged it in, and here's another photo. There's 2 photos he gave me. Thank you. Plugged it in and felt the energy change immediately. Then ran a meditation class that night without any hindrance whatsoever, and he was ecstatic. He was over the moon because he was very genuine about what he was doing. And so these photos are manifestations of the entities taken with an iPhone 7 back then, just random click, and this showed up. These aren't doctored photos or anything. So, this is as you see it type of thing. It's a little bit maybe like when digital cameras first came out. People started capturing orbs on photos, whereas conventional process photographs didn't show orbs prior, the digital did. And that was a reality of what the orbs are showing too, but this is another reality. These were really interesting. This guy was also a real estate agent, and I'd had experience with many real estate agents in the past where they bought geo-cleanses, and any of the houses that don't sell, what they do is they plug a geo-cleanse in and it changes the energy, and they do sell. And when they do bother to come back to me to check on a house that's not selling before they put the geo-cleanse in, always, every single time, there's been a death in the property, there's an entity in the property. And by changing the energy, the people come in, it feels nice, there's no interference, there's no energetic interference or anything like that. And people are happy, it feels great, it helps to sell houses. So if there's any real estate agents out there watching this, here's a little tip for you, buy a couple of geo-cleanses. Okay, other experiences I've had, many years ago, I used to do ghost tours at Geelong Jail. Well, we only did 2 ghost tours at Geelong Jail. Geelong Jail is a really spooky place. I hope it's still open for ghost tours. I heard recently they wanted to redevelop it. Don't know why. It's a historic building. Geelong Jail was built on what I think they call Pentavillian principles, which is a jail building structure was shaped like a cross, as in you will repent type of thing. The jail was 3 levels high. The railing on the second and third were level, and that's the hand railing for the balconies, which were probably only about that wide, was not up to above hip height, was below hip height. And I drew the short straw, so to speak, and got the top level, which was, like, I'm not great with heights, and being 3 levels up with a very, very shallow balustrade on a very skinny balcony was a little bit unnerving. And there were some really, really interesting things that went on during those ghost tours. For example, I got pushed into a door. There was another psychic woman at these ghost tours who would get physically punched by something that she couldn't see. We managed to fix that. She put one of our energy pendants on, and that stopped it. They set up vigils at the ghost tour, but they got nothing from the vigils. And that was they put flour across the floor and waited to see if there was any footsteps or footprints or interference with the flour, but it didn't work. But in the showers, and the showers hadn't been used in years, there was no water supply to the showers, and the showers were pretty gruesome, long communal showers. After being there for an hour or so, someone reported, and I did see wet footprints going across the floor. Another psychic there got challenged by another strong energy who virtually said, what are you doing here, type of thing. There were some weird experiences that actually occurred at the ghost tour, as you'd expect. There was a lot of tours that a lot of people who went to those tours. There's a lot of energy junkies out there, a lot of people who just love this type of thing. We also did ghost tours down at Cape Otway Lighthouse. We did 2 of them, I think. One for filming, another one for Lighthouse Weekend, which was a weekend that all the lighthouses around Australia have once a year. They open them up to people to come and visit them. Well, Cape Otway Lighthouse is very, very old, and there have been numerous shipwrecks at Cape Otway directly below the lighthouse with lots of deaths, and there have been quite a few deaths in the lighthouse keepers' quarters and around that. There was also a telegraph station very close to it, within probably 200 metres. I mean, that was quite haunted, so to speak, too. But one night while we were down there, I decided I'd actually stay the night rather than driving home. Cape Otway to Frankston, I think about 5 hours in the middle of the night. It's not a very safe thing to do. So what I did was stay the night, thinking, great, I'll be sensible. So I stayed in one of the bedrooms in what was the lighthouse keeper's quarters, which is now I think it was a B&B. And all night long, I had 5 sleep paralysis attacks. Like, I was pretty brave, and every time I woke up from each sleep paralysis attack, I had a wet, hairy head right here. As I was waking up, I could feel it was like long hair too. I could feel it and feel it was wet and feel it was a head. However, as soon as I came fully to, it would disappear. Then I'd go back to sleep again. I don't know how. And it would happen again. It happened 5 times through the night. Come 5:30 in the morning, when it started to get light, I was out of there. I'm not going to stay there anymore. I'm not going to be there anymore. And interesting, as you're driving into Cape Otway and its national park, the trees don't seem to stand straight like normal trees. Everything's bent over. Everything's really twisted and spooky. And I'd had other people comment on it too, and I really noticed it too. It was, maybe part of the set, so to speak, but no, it was all real. It was all actually natural. Okay, I've actually got some questions coming up. Here's one woman saying, my daughter gets sleep paralysis and can't move her head. It's only been going on for the last 6 months. I've also been living in a house for 8 years. That's a really interesting one, because I've lived in houses or slept in houses in the past, and when I was younger, never had sleep paralysis attacks. It only started to happen to me when I was in my early 30s. As you grow older, you change, and that might explain why Caroline here, it's only been happening recently with her daughter. It's interesting also too, when you go to the Wikipedia page, I'm hoping it's still there, I checked it recently, last couple of months, where Wikipedia page for sleep paralysis. We know that the Wikipedia is actually run by people who like to control what we think and say, without its freedom from choice rather than freedom of choice, which is the genre for the right at the moment too. And Wikipedia tends to be a little bit, how'd you say, skeptical. And the page talks about the sleep paralysis attack being something to do with the respiratory system and the heart. I totally agree. But on the page, it showed an old painting, 18th century painting or something, of a woman lying stark naked, spread across the bed, with a big demon on her chest. And I thought that was really, really interesting, because that sometimes that's what it can actually feel like something's really pushing down on your chest. It's not a nice feeling. Okay. Okay, there's some other questions coming in, but it's all right. Okay, Caroline's saying here she had the Gerard cleaners plugged in 24/7. Well, that could also be a case that maybe there's not an interview that like the Wikipedia page says that it's something going on with the respiratory. That's good that you've told me that, Caroline, because that might point you towards maybe getting your daughter to have a look at, take it to the right people, the doctors and people, whoever like that, leave it in their hands. I just had another question coming in. What about saging? Like using sage or smudging in a house to clear energies like entities and things like that. Saging works, and how that works is that the smoke from the sage, when you smoke a house with a sage, you actually raise the energy in the house. The smoke and the aroma of the sage, I think it is, creates a nice light energy, and it's designed to clear entities and things like that. But unfortunately, when the smoke and the aroma dies down, so does the energy, and the activity can actually start to happen all over again. And actually, someone just came in with a question now, Charlene, about asking about smudging. It's temporary, it doesn't do it properly. Without pushing my own barrow, the Gerard cleanse does do it properly. We put a huge effort into over probably a couple of years or 12 months, I'd say, to get it right, the program and the frequency right, so the Gerard cleanse did actually remove the entity and the bioplasmic energy. It's something that is quite difficult to do. I come across people from time to time saying, oh, I go to people's houses and I clear people's houses and things like that. I say, okay, show me. And they give me an address where they've done this work, and I look it up with Google Earth, and I don't say, no, you haven't, because, you know, something might have happened. However, if the job's done properly, then the bioplasmic charge in the air completely disappears. If it's not done properly, where someone walking in, saying a couple of words and a couple of mantras with a bell or a singing bowl and things like that, and those types of things are great vibrational tools. Like, we've got a couple of great singing bowls ourselves here. I've got a tuning fork here, which is, I don't know where it is. I'm going to go and grab it, maybe. It's 4 foot long and made of quartz. We've done amazing, interesting things with that. But it is quite a difficult thing to remove that energy. We did work hard to actually get that nailed, and that was probably about 6-7 years ago. And we keep on checking that and checking that and checking that to make sure that the process is still in place, so everyone gets the benefit. This is our tuning fork that's 4 foot long, made of quartz. And it's got an amazing sound. I don't know if you should go hear this. Excuse the cobwebs on the end of it. That's our tuning fork. We love our tools like this. It's great used outside on the ground when there's high solar winds, before we developed the solar wind program for the geoclinics, it tends to sort of calm things down. But after about 30 minutes of the charge, the bioplasma, the geomagnetic field affecting the Earth, creating a radiation charge coming out of the ground from solar winds, would actually then come back. I've got another question coming in here. Have not slept since we moved to a place in somewhere in the house built 3 years ago. So this can happen in new houses. It's what's happened on the land in the past. The spirit of the land is strong and would be on sacred land or in an area where there's been Aboriginal death. I've had some freaky nightmares, jumping out of bed and gasping. Interesting. She thought the quiet countryside would make her sleep easier. The nightmares are a big one. I had a woman recently who had a daughter who was experiencing night terrors, and the daughter was also having sleep issues in the sense that she wouldn't go to bed because of the night terrors from having an entity in the house. And so she'd stay up as long as she could to get as tired as she could before she went to bed. But every night this was occurring, and it stopped with the geoclinics. Can I just grab that off you? Hang on, Leanne's just creating more work for me. Yeah, Leanne's just giving me an interesting little side note. Something I've picked up a long time ago is that the Aboriginals before white men came along didn't have this problem. They, with their own ceremonies or whatever they did, they would be able to, they had their own ceremonies which did actually clear the land of this type of energy, because they were quite aware they didn't have technology, or they weren't tainted by bad food to interfere with their biology, to interfere with their perception. And it all started in Australia when white men came to Australia. And that's why in Australia, something I can do when I'm reading Google Earth is basically muscle test back as far back as we can as to how far back the imprints that started to occur in Australia. It was about 150, 180, 200 years ago, something like that. Whereas I've read properties, say, in the UK, in London, and that's, as we know, a very, very, very old city. And, I've read death imprints which go back, 6,000 years. So that's an interesting aspect or bit of knowledge around Australia and what actually has gone on as far as the history of bioplasmic radiation, so to speak. Mind you, there was another bioplasmic radiation that did occur after white man came to Australia and started culling, which was just the world's biggest tragedy, is that after the Aboriginals went through what they should not have gone through, their emotional state en masse created a charge over the land, which was an information energy field of being depressed and being very, very angry. And in some parts of Australia where I've done readings, the charge is so strong, it's as if there's been deaths absolutely everywhere, like a battlefield type of thing. Every house has entity issues going on, and the energy is quite dense and quite sticky over, probably 10, 20, 30 square kilometres. Leanne's giving me another one here. It doesn't occur if you're very spiritual. I can say that. It's got nothing to do with one's spirituality. Okay, I get what she's saying. If you're a very spiritual type of person, so let's take the Indian yogis, for example. When they die in what they call mahasamadhi. They go into meditative state, into samadhi state, and they exit through the crown. And when that happens, they don't leave a death imprint, they don't leave bioplasmic radiation. In fact, a lot of them, when they die, their body doesn't decompose, as with Paramahansa Yogananda. If you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, he talks about, or there's a mortician's report in the book which talks about how they kept him in a glass top coffin for 27 days, and they poked him and smelt him every day and checked him for mould, and as if he was still alive. Even his Gerard, when he died, and where they buried him, the energy of his little mandura, I think they call it, was so vibrant, so beautiful. It was evident that when he died, he also died in Mahasamadhi, which had actually been documented. So that's our spooky stories for today. There are numerous others that I just can't remember. I'm always doing readings for people on a daily basis, geopathic, Google Earth readings. And probably one or two readings a day have exactly this type of thing going on. You don't always get spirit activity going on in the house if there's been a death, but it's a very, very common thing, and it's a reality. It's interesting how a lot of the skeptics out there try to debunk all this, and they go to the nth degree to try and do that. But you can't debunk people's actual real experiences in the houses, and some people get really, really offended because they've been through a lot of trauma in dealing with what they've moved into, what they've been living with, until geoclones or a stelladone comes along and fixes the problem. They get quite offended when they have some skeptic going, it's a load of rubbish, it doesn't exist. It does exist, and it's been going on for a long, long time. So thanks for attending, and in 2 weeks' time, we'll be doing a webinar on the two different types of 5G, and I'll have more testing done by 2 weeks' time on my brand new 5G phone. It'll be very interesting. We wrote a blog, as I said, last night. We finished it at 8 o'clock at night on the 5G, which is up now. There's also a blog on the spooky photos, those two photos I showed you earlier on, and the whole experience, which was a link on the Geoclinics page, but we just put it into blogs. I think it's been done this afternoon or in the next couple of days. So if you want to read that and view those photos again, they'll be there. So thank you for attending, and we'll hopefully see you all in a couple of weeks' time.